was fun for me to write and talk about my poetry because I started out as a poet. Now, I have to tell you that I started out and wrote my first poem when I was in first grade. Was it any good? Well, I'll tell it to you now, and you will see how bad I was. It went, bus, bus, wait for us, we are going to school, and we know the rule. We were going to go to the zoo, but the teacher was sick, boo-hoo, so instead we went to pick berries and could only find cherries. The end. but I was in first grade. I didn't understand scansion. I actually understood rhyme, but I also didn't understand what really made a poem. My second poem was in second grade that I remember, and it was a little better. Because, you know, if you keep doing it, you'll eventually get it close to right. And this one went, where is the candy cane island? Where in the world can it be? Right across dreamland, across the canal. Just come and follow me. There's Santa Claus's summer home, and Jack Frost lives there too. And that's all I can remember. But about 50 years after I wrote that poem, I got a letter from a man in New York City whose name was Peter, and he had been in the class, and he remembered the entire poem, which I had long forgotten. But anyway, I kept on writing poetry because I loved it, mostly in rhyme. I wrote, you know how when you're in elementary school at some point in your state, they ask you to write an essay on the manufacturing that's done in your state. And so I was living in New York City at the time, so I wrote a long series of rhymed couplets about the manufacturing in New York State. Where everybody else was writing an essay, I wrote a long poem. As I recall, it had a wonderful couplet for Otis elevators, but I don't remember what it was, thank goodness. In my senior year at college, at Smith College, I wrote my senior intellectual history exam in rhymed couplets. And the teacher was proctoring, in those days they proctored the exams, they'd walk up and down and just keep an eye and make sure you weren't cheating. I mean, he kept stopping and looking over my shoulder because he was fascinated that somebody would be sitting there writing rhymed couplets. He had no idea what it was, and he gave me an A+ for the exam for what was probably about a C+ worth of knowledge, because he considered it grace under pressure. And so he awarded me more points than I deserved. But I began really my poetry career after 113 rejection letters, which I papered the wall of my bedroom at my parents' house with. But the 114th was an acceptance. And after that, the rejections no longer mattered, because I knew if you can sell one poem, you can sell more. And I kept on going. So I thought what I would do today is to read you some poems from my children's books, and then I will end with poems from my adult books. The first one that I'm going to read is from a book called Water Music that I wrote with my son, Jason Stemple. And it's very, very simple. It's about, he did the photographs. And this one is called Icicle, and the word icicle is just spelled down on the side, but that's not, you know, it doesn't start each of the lines. That's just the, icicle is the name of the poem. There is no rhyme for frozen time. It is itself a poem. And here's another one from a book that I wrote with my son Jason's photographs called Count Me a Rhyme. And it's called One, Solitaire. One lone elk. One single solo me, the only one that I can see. Alone there's none to disagree with one and only solo me. And you see this wonderful photograph of this very solo elk, which he took. And I showed him the poem that I wrote to his picture, and he said, yeah, that's what you see, Mom. But really, after I took the picture, he got up and walked over and checked out the other male elk that was coming down to try to steal his harem of females and managed to send him off. So there really are like 10 females over here and another elk coming down over here, but that wasn't the photograph, so the photograph is of one. So continuing the Jason theme, I'm doing that because he lives in Charleston and I'm visiting him tomorrow. Here's a poem from Birds of a Feather. And you'll notice with my children's poems, I tend to try to be very clever and do interesting things with words. Sometimes puns, sometimes the poem turns on a single word. And in this poem, which is about turns, the word turn is the one I'm playing with. It's called Turns Galore. At the seaside, turns galore. One turn, one turn more. I turn, you turn, my turn to fly turn. Overhead and high turn, underneath and by turn. Why turn? Why turn? Turning turns are all returning there upon the shore. So it's also a kind of a tongue tickler. Again, bug off. Creepy, crawly poems. How many of you cannot stand bugs? I'm snakes. I won't write poems about snakes because I don't think Jason would take a picture of a snake either. Anyway, this one is called Honey, Be Mine. Oh, be mine, oh blossom please, you are the best. The true bee's knees will make a beeline to the hive. You'll help to make the beehive thrive. I'll turn you into something runny, coagulating into honey. Sweet and sweeter, you're the best. A+ on this bee student's test. But I also write serious poems for kids as well. I live about 20 minutes from Emily Dickinson's house. I call her my neighbor. And for about 7 years, I wrote poems. I wrote sonnets about Emily Dickinson, one maybe a year, just when they came out. I wasn't trying to write a book about it. I just would write a sonnet a year. And suddenly I had 7 sonnets. And that's not enough to make a book. So I gave it to a friend of mine and asked him. He's the official, one of the official composers in the music department at Smith College in Massachusetts, near where I live. And he said, I want to do a series of lieder, songs for soprano to sing with those poems. And I said, neat, I think that's great. And he did that, and we had, like this big group of people at the one time we sang. He had it performed. But it still nudged and needled me. But no more sonnets were coming out. So I sort of put it away until I did a book of poems with J. Patrick Lewis about the life of Chagall, the painter Chagall. And the publisher said, do you have anything more like this? And I said, well, I have these 7 sonnets about Emily Dickinson. He said, would you let me see them? And I said, yes, and I sent it to him. And he said, you write about 7 more, and we've got a book. It took me 7 years to write these, but I sat down, and in 3 weeks I had written the rest of them, because it was so exciting. So this is, each of the poems is, each of the sonnets is written from a different point of view. This one is actually written from my point of view, and it says, Emily Dickinson's house, J.Y. speaks. 2 towns away, there is a street where poems and their readers meet, a place a lady poet stood amidst the clabbered brick and wood, and sometimes, most emphatically, the risk of immortality was written while she skimmed the milk or mended clothes with threads of silk. She looked around 8 windows wide, while rarely venturing outside, but inside, where her poems took place, she gave the world a fine embrace. So if you visit, take a breath, inhale the poems beyond her death. As an afterwards, I wrote a 4-line poem, not a sonnet, obviously. It's called Emily After. Emily Dickinson stayed at home and each day wrote a little poem. A little poem each day turns out to be a lot to write about. Recently, I had a poem called Grumbles from the Forest that I wrote with Rebecca Kai-Dotlich. And we both wrote poems that we would pick a fairy tale. We had the Cinderella poems, we had different fairy tales. And we would each take either a character or a different voice to tell the story so that you got a variety of voices all the way through. Beauty and the Beast, she wrote one about Beauty's Daydream, and I wrote one called Beauty and the Beast, an Anniversary. And I actually had written it earlier for my husband when he was still alive for, I think it was like our 40th anniversary. It is winter now, and the roses are blooming again, their petals bright against the snow. My father died last April. My sisters no longer write except at the turnings of the year, content with their fine houses and their grandchildren. Beast and I putter in the gardens and walk slowly on the forest paths. He is graying around the muzzle, and I have silver combs to match my hair. I have no regrets, none. Though sometimes I do wonder what sounds children might have made running across the marble halls, swinging from the birches over the roses in the snow. So that's Beauty and the Beast. The last few years, though, I have also, for the first time in many years, turned my hands to writing poems for adults. As was mentioned, I invented something called a poem a day subscription list. For 3 years, I've been writing a poem a day. I do it for a number of reasons. One, it keeps me writing. It's a task. I don't say that the poems I send out to my 342 subscribers are finished. In fact, sometimes I totally rewrite them for a year or two going on. But they are getting a first look at a poem of mine. Sometimes the poems are for children, sometimes they're for adults. But the fun thing for me is that out of doing that kind of holding myself to a particular task, my skills have gotten better. And I've actually, of the 365, but sometimes I do 2 poems a day, sometimes I do 3. I have sold to journals and magazines, both in print and online, probably between 50 and 60 of the poems. Now, remember, they've all been revised. The first thing that I sent out is not what I sent to the various journals. And I've had several books come out of them, which we will get to in a minute. But I'm now going to read you some of my adult poetry. The first, my husband became ill and was finally diagnosed as having cancer. And I wrote 2 books about that. The first one was called The Radiation Sonnets, because every day, every moment of my day that he was awake, for the 43 days he was in radiation, I was there for him, totally present in the moment. But at night, when he was asleep and I could the way a mother would go into a room with a new baby and make sure that the baby was still breathing. Something that you think that as a mother you've invented, but in fact, almost every mother and father does that. They go in and they check and they listen, and sometimes if baby is breathing so shallowly, you go in and you put your hand on their stomach or on their cheek just to make sure you're really hearing that they're breathing. I would do that with David, and I would stand there at the bedside, and when I was sure he was in deep sleep, I would go upstairs to the attic, which is where my writing room was at the time, and I would write a sonnet about the day. Why a sonnet? Because they were hard, because they were structured, they were formal, and it was one way that I could structure and restructure the day that I had just been through. And I did this for 43 days. Now, my husband David used to read everything that I wrote. He was my first reader. But he said, I can't read these poems. Maybe later I'll be able to read them. So I was sort of lost without a first reader, but I did have my writing group and I read it to them. And I'm going to read you the first poem from the book that resulted. I asked him, I said, how would you feel about my trying to show these poems, to get them published? And he said, if they can help anyone else going through the same thing, you have to do it. So I gave it to my agent, and we weren't sure whether anybody was going to want to buy a book about radiation. But I also had been in correspondence with a friend of mine from 5th and 6th grade. And in 5th and 6th grade, her name was Susan Levitt. But she married, and her name, she worked for NPR, for the public radio, and her name was Susan Stanberg. And I sent her some of the poems, just saying, Susan, this is what I'm going through now, because we were exactly the same age. And she said, I'm going to read some of those on my program, and I wanted to interview you on the program. I went, okay. I didn't send them to her for that. I sent them to her to let her know what I was working on at that point. So she did that, and an editor heard them on her way to work, and she found out who my agent was, and she said, before you send that manuscript to anyone else, will you please send me a copy? And she bought it. So this is the first poem. It's called A Promise to Eurydice, Day 1. Do not go, my love, oh, do not leave so soon familiar halls and rooms that know your touch. I want another April, May, and June. I want, oh, still the wanting is so much. What, 40 years gone by? Why need we more when those before us fill us both with dread? Oftentimes I see you staring out the door as though you're longing for the path ahead. We go then, hand in hand, into the deep, each day a visit to the blank machines. Those promises we made, we mean to keep by these mechanicals or other means. And if alone you chance that endless track, I'll bring you home without once looking back. Anyone who has dealt with someone who has cancer or who has cancer themselves knows that at some point you have to laugh. You have to make fun of what's going on. You have to do what we call gallows humor, galgen humor. And so there are poems in here that are funny. Especially, I have a series of poems in here, I'm not going to read them now, but that we called, or I called, the food wars. Because getting someone who's been going through either chemo or radiation to eat is one of the hardest problems. And the caretaker feels, you have to eat, I've got to feed you. And the person who has just had either chemo or radiation has no desire to eat. Nothing tastes the same. And so I wrote some funny poems about that. And people who have taken this book, bought this book, tell me that those poems, especially the poems about the food wars, were the ones that resonated the most with them because that was exactly what they were going through. I write a lot of fantasy poems too. I've been published in a lot of the magazines and journals that do fantasy. And this one is called The Last Selkie Child. And I will start with a poem about the storyteller. He unpacks his bag of tales with fingers quick as a weaver's, picking the weft threads, threading the warp. Watch his fingers, watch his lips, speaking the old familiar words. Once there was, and there was not, oh best beloved, when the world was filled with wishes, the way the sea is filled with fishes. All those threads pulling us back to another world, another time, when goose girls married well and frogs could rhyme, when maids spoke syllables of pearl and stepmothers came to grief. Belief is the warp, and the sharp-picked pattern of motif reminds us that Araby is not so far, that the pleasure dome of a Baghdad caliph sits side by side with the rush-roofed home of a Tatacoat or an animal bride. Cinderella wears a shoe first fitted in the East, where her prince, no more a beast than the usual run of royal son, measures her nobility by the lotus foot, so many inches to the rain. Then the slipper made glass by a slip of ear and tongue. All tales are mistakes made true by the telling. The watching eye takes in the hue, the listening ear the word, but all they comprehend is art. A story must be worn again before the magic garment fits the ready heart. The storyteller is done. He packs his bags. But watch his fingers and his lips. It is the oldest feat of prestidigitation. What you saw, what you heard, was equal to a new creation. The colors blur. Time is now. He speaks his final piece before his final vow. It is all true. It is not true. The more I tell you, the more I shall lie. What is story but jesting pilot's cry? I am not paid to tell you the truth. Well, then I wrote another adult book called Ekaterina Slav, One Family's Passage to America, and it's about the Yolens. And I want to read you two poems from there. My father's family, the Yolens, were very interesting. One says that when you mean they were quirky, they were strange, they were passionate, they were anarchic. This is one about my grandmother. It's called Spinster. And it's all true, it turns out. At 17, half orphaned, outspoken, literate and numerate, keeper of her father's books, she could pass as a Ukrainian peasant, driving horse and cart ahead of the Cossacks to rescue Jews and hide them in cellars. She was considered unmarriageable by the aunts. They honked about her single state, called her father selfish, brought in a shadchan, a matchmaker, to find her a suitable mate. But like a peasant's mule, she balked at any arrangement they tried to make, till she heard about a young man who spoke many languages more than Yiddish, visiting his brother and helping with his work. Without permission, she dressed in black, veiled, disguised, accompanied by the maid, went off to the store to get a look like some princess out of a tale, came home and made the match herself. Scandalized, the aunts shook their fingers at her, but her papa knew she would be happy and make many babies, and the girls would all take after her, smart and funny and quick. I have to add that she was like about 4'8", and she would drive that cart like a bat out of you-know-where. The last poem in this book, I will read the last two poems. One is called Will. My father's name, he always said, was not William, it was Will. Sometimes he was known as Bill or Billy, but it was Will. Yet when, after he died, and he lived with me the last 4 years of his life, after he died, I found his papers, that said his name was William, and he had signed the papers William. What were these papers? These were papers when he came over through Ellis Island. I had been told all my life that he was born in New Haven, Connecticut. But he came over when he was 7 years old, and I found out when I was 35, when my mother said, yes, he's a naturalized citizen. He was naturalized, it turned out, 6 months after I was born. But he always denied that he was not born in America. No, he was born in America. So this is a poem about that. It's called Will. The past will not lie buried. Little bones and teeth, harrowed from grave soil, tell different tales. My father's bank box told me, in a paper signed by his own hand, that name quite clearly, William. All the years he denied it, that name, that place of birth, that compound near Kiev, and I so eager for the variance with which he lived his life. In the middle of my listening, death, that old interrupter, with the unkindness of all coroners, revealed his third name to me. Not William, not Will, but Wolf. Wolf. And so at last I know that story. My old wolf, white against the Russian snows, the cracking of his bones, the stretching sinews, the coarse hair growing boldly on the belly below the eye. White grandfather, my children cry, what great teeth you have, before he devours them as he devoured me, all of me, bones and blood, all of my life. Quirky, anarchic, difficult, charming. That's my father. This is the last poem. Rebirth. Velvel, wolf, will, that child in Ekaterinoslav, that boy holding the toy dog, who said he knew no second tongue, but when dying babbled in Russian to me. That young man who told a lie about the place of his birth. That father who taught me songs, words, tales, but little of love or history or poetry. That one. I have written these poems as resurrection. I have molded these words to invent moment and memory. I have crafted these short lines for the ones who come after, my children's children. For them I've created, recreated really, a lifetime, a country, a shtetl, a home. I can do no more. After my husband died, I wrote a second book. This one is called Things to Say to a Dead Man. And I want to read a poem because this is fall, and this is a poem called First Fall, meaning the first fall after his death, because he died in March. Not March of 2006, March of 2006. First fall. This is my first fall without the leaves redder than I remember, not the color of blood which dries dark, but something more vibrant in its long dying. This is my first fall without the morning so cold I wear one of your old sweaters over my nightgown and turn up the heat till the house breaks out in a sweat. This is my first fall without the hardy horse chestnuts, conkers you call them, banging down on the roof slates all night long, pocking the car. This is my first fall without the geese and their dyslexic V's that sometimes read like an L or M, head to where Connecticut and Massachusetts huddle together for warmth. This is my first fall without. You have gone before me into winter, into spring, into summer, somehow a consummate time traveler I can never catch up to, always a season ahead. The book that I want to read the most of, because it's brand new, and I brought copies with me because it's brand new and you couldn't have gotten it on your own, is just, this arrived the day before I left for here, so I brought 14 copies with me. So if anyone wants them, they're out there. But it's called Sister Fox's Field Guide to the writing life. And these are poems about writing process. You won't need any other guide, she says. Anyway, there are 4 Sister Fox poems in it that start each of the sections. And I'm going to start with the first Sister Fox poem. Sister Fox wakes. Morning, early, bright and pearly, Sister Fox wakes up with a poem, singing in her head. Every line sounds like a work of art, of craft, though foxes are known for their craft, not their art. She runs outside to share the peace with the chickadees and the lilac bush, with the alders stoic and straight, pretending that being a roost grants them dignity, with the river that rocks to a rill of its own devising. No one listens to Sister Fox, so she yips at the sun, not quite as enchanting as howling at the rising moon. But writing needs both heat and light, day and night, in order to be heard. This is called Artistic Statement number 1. Do not be fooled, never be fooled by the brackets between my eyebrows or the neat little lines of my poem. Do not think me content in the sheepfold. Do not judge me by the lithographic map. Do not assume me, assuming the posture, the rigid ridge of spine, the snap of salute. I turn the map upside down to read it, leap the fold's fence, write the last lines first. A cauldron simmers inside me, a caldera, a chaos, a concatenation, a stew of my own intestines. I feed on my heart, a word containing both heat and art. My stomach roils, bulges, crawls, then my womb opens to the universe, and I give birth to a dancing star. It's a little bit about how you get started. The muse complains. So I says to her, my turn, you gotta listen, not just keep talking, otherwise nothing's gonna fill that empty space of yours. And art just don't make itself up, you know. It takes quiet, and you so filled with the day's noise you don't hear. Close the door, put down the phone, click the mute. I gotta get a word in edgewise, I tells her. But she keeps yakking about her day, her crappy life, her loneliness, the kids don't call, don't write, what she needs from the grocery, what the New York effing Times says. But listen to me, not so much. We got work here, I shout, the 2 of us, that old team, me, you, a long history between. I got food to buy too, ambrosia to brew, places to go. Haven't been to Athens in years. Am due a new spring hat, berets are so last century. So my cards tell me, but I'm here doing what I gotta do. When you gonna listen? So, you know, you gotta listen. This one is for Florence. Oh, what I need to write. I tell him I need a keyboard, laptop, cup of tea, birdsong, morning light. I say I need quiet, a long walk, dog on the leash or off. I insist I need a banana, apple, muse, daemon. I talk about the coolness of the day, sweetness of a baby's breath, kiss from my sweetheart, the full moon. I lie. It is what I do best, lying, making up stuff, creating a fiction of myself as a writer. In the end, it is all I really need. Here's a quote from Ernest Hemingway that started me on this poem. The quote is, "It is because we have had such great writers in the past that a writer is driven far out past where he can go." So this poem is called Driving Far Past. Note to self. Keep the headlights on, top up the gas. In the ice chest, pack a good 10 meals, flask of gin, hot tea in a thermos, apples still ripening, dark chocolate for the down moments. In your backpack, clean underwear, necessary drugs, Swiss Army knife, extra batteries, map for emergencies, a compass, the complete Shakespeare, Denison's fairy tales, Dickinson's poems, then get on the writer's road. Drive until your right foot goes numb, your butt has permanently shaped the seat. Stop only to pee, to check your compass, the moral one, not the one with true north. Only when you are too tired to keep your eyes open. Pull to the side of the road and dream. In the morning, You will have a poem in your hand, a novel in your head, a landscape to discover. A hero looks not at all like you in your rearview mirror. Use him, use her, use all of them, all of us. All right, this one's called Surrendering. Julia Cameron wrote this, and it's what started the process of writing this. The creative process, she writes, is a process of surrender, not control. So this is surrendering. You walk through a landscape where birch shimmer, dogwood trees drip pearly buds, early flowers, blue and gold, raise banners to the season. In a river, a float of ducklings, skim of dragonflies greet the day. On a branch above, a solitary redtail stands guard. The sky arch is cloudless, blue. Sundered by this, you give yourself over to its lure. Opening your arms, you're pulled into the sphere, as close to prayer as you ever come. So why this surprise when the making of art requires a similar surrender? Get on your aching knees, breathe in, loose the girdle of your control. Only now are you ready to begin. All right, this is another one of the Sister Fox poems. It's called What Sister Fox Does Not Know. Sister Fox does not know an I am from a foot. Her own feet are so dainty she only leaves dust on the trail. Sister Fox does not know a strophe from a trochee, though her accent is pure dog. If asked, she'd say that Anapest is a town somewhere in the Caucasus where her cousin lives. An apostrophe is what is happening to too many animals on the broad road to extinction. She claims that Caesura conquered Rome, that Aristotle wrote his poetics in the city of catharsis, that scansion is what all good predators do when looking over the field for prey. But if you ask her, and if she actually listens, instead of just reading her own stories out loud, she will tell you she loves poetry. And sometimes she really does. Am I in love with words? Yes, I am. This is called a specific gravity. Sometimes a poem, sometimes merely a thought, reaches a specific gravity and greenness begins. Like a fingerling swimming against the pole's pool, dark green question mark. Like the uncurling fern, the top of a fiddle never to be played except in the retinal memory. Like the quick thrust of daffs before the winter ends, before spring quite begins. Quick green thoughts, sometimes just like that. This is, I think, probably the shortest poem in the book. Words are like moles, tunneling, always tunneling into the deep, the dark places, the worm larders, the velvet night, where breath is moist and soft and silence is complete, where there are no traces of light until the poets and the stars. This is called Riding the Goose, Riding the Swan. Where do you think all those heroes, riding the goose, riding the swan, in tights, cocked hats, swords in hand, were heading towards anyway? If you check happy endings, you haven't a clue. They're chasing wonder, knowing the unknown, not marriage to king, queen, not making love to the princess awake or asleep, not a cross or a crown or the taking of a town, but the real ever after the book is closed. What they seek doesn't finish when the clock strikes 1, or end with ball, feast, test, first kiss, but when they crack open the common world, like a walnut struck with a hammer, first thing on Christmas morning. This actually happened to me. One of my books was not only banned, several of my books have been banned, but one of my books was burned on the steps of the Board of Education in Kansas City. The book was Briar Rose, and it was burned because it had a gay character in it. So, this is called Fahrenheit. Heinrich Heine wrote this: where one burns books, one will eventually burn people. And how prophetic was that? All right, Fahrenheit. Long before Bradbury warned us, we knew that burning books could consume us all. I had a book torched once, a conflagration on the steps of the Kansas City Board of Education. Taken from the library, my book was set on a hibachi match lit. My words browned and writhed on the page. Sentences screamed, paragraphs begged for life. Before the arson could be stopped, a year of my writing went up in flames. Far away on the east coast of America, I felt the heat of it burning my cheeks. Somewhere in Germany, an old man dances. This one is called Baggage. And it's really about reading, not writing, but this is reading other people's work. How much can you carry into a book? A small suitcase, duffel bag, backpack, leather-handled traveling chest, wooden box bound with jute ropes. Me, I bring along a steamer truck of ideas, prejudices, biases, a lifeline spanning 7 decades, 5 generations, old world detritus, 60s folk songs, an early introduction to George Fox and Jane Eyre, the withering of treaties on the English moors, pirates, and my own piece of age, lipizans and unicorns and a fear of heights. I have packed an old girdle, a griddle for pancakes, 6 boxes of dark chocolate, my passport, an album of family portraits, children and grands, a black and white photo of my late husband on the day I knew I would marry him, standing with a camera in his hand and looking out past me to the future, which would be longer for me than it would be for him. So when I read your book, do not expect me to read it as you wrote it. I read it bent over with the weight of my life, my eyes focused on the past I am trying to remember, and the parts I am longing to forget. I'm going to end with the last of the Sister Fox closes the book. Sister Fox closes the book, her field guide to poems and the writing life. She thinks about their habitats, their markings, the chunnering and chatter of their songs. They are the bird life of the writer's world. She likes the feel of them, the scent. She licks her lips. The field guide's pages are still flagged with yellow and green stickies, the color of spring. They tell her where to find the words she likes: antic, caldera, Kaylee, frass, wold. They do not tell her what the poems mean. She does not know if they will help her in the field. She knows they will simply be. A book closed, she thinks, is still open to the heart. She smiles with too many teeth and trots outside, humming first one line, then another to herself, as she lopes along the forest path, her tail a banner in the wind. Thank you.